Good morning. Once again, we gather for another Living Hope Today study. I want to welcome you and introduce you to Deuteronomy chapter 25. You remember the book of Deuteronomy is a series of admonitions given by Moses for this younger generation that's about to enter the promised land. Their heritage has died in the desert because of their unwillingness to obey God and take the land when they were commanded to. And Moses is just giving the people that are about to enter the promised land guidance. How should this society function? What should we focus on? What are the punishments? What are the crimes? How do we deal with life? It's very fascinating. And today is no exception. Let's look at it together. When you get to Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 1, we read this: when men have a dispute, well, I guess we can stop right there. You know that the sinful nature occupies every heart on the planet. You know there's going to be disputes, okay? So when men have disputes, what are they going to do? They're going to take it to court, and the judges will decide the case. And here's what God really wants: acquitting the innocent, condemning the guilty. If you're guilty, you need to be punished. If you're innocent, you don't need to be punished, and you don't need to suffer the wrong that was done by the one who's guilty. That's just the basic thread of common justice. As the passage moves forward, it tells us what happens. If the guilty man deserves to be beaten, then the judge shall make him lie down and have him flogged in his presence with the number of lashes his crime deserves. So somebody decides what crime deserves how many lashes, and those lashes are meted out by the court. This is a lot different than a fine, right? Pay your $100 at the desk and have a nice day. No, you're going to suffer for the wrong that you committed. You're going to be beaten with a rod. But he must not give him more than, so here is some restraint in the instruction. You can't give him more than 40 lashes. If he is flogged more than that, your brother will be degraded in your eyes. This takes us to the New Testament. The Apostle Paul stood up for the faith. He believes in Jesus. He's telling everybody about it. Jesus has swung his life around 180 degrees. Instead of persecuting the church, now he's professing Christ and proclaiming salvation to all who will hear him. And what was his reward? Do you remember? Let me help you remember. 2 Corinthians 11:24. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. What's that about? Well, on the 40th lash, most people die. That's what it's about. So Paul has received 40 lashes minus 1 how many times? 5 times. His back has to be hamburger, scar tissue. It just has to be something that's grotesque. He's been hurt so badly. Why? Because they judged him a criminal. Why was he a criminal? Because he kept proclaiming that Jesus is the Christ. That was his crime. And in verse 25, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Understand that this punishment that we're reading about in Deuteronomy 25 advanced all through Judaism, all the way to the New Testament. Here we see Paul receiving the punishment described in chapter 25 of Deuteronomy. And he goes on, once I was stoned, 3 times I was shipwrecked, I spent a night and a day in the open sea. He goes on from there if you want to study it for yourself, but it's a fascinating thing to understand that those punishments originated right here. Then the text moves us forward. It says, don't muzzle an ox while it's treading out the grain. What's that referring to? Well, the ox should be able to eat some of the grain while he is treading the grain. Now we shift topics again. If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her Look at this. The first son she bears shall carry on the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted out from Israel. Now, this is probably not too popular to the modern ear, right? We have a plan for you now that your brother-in-law survived your husband. You get to marry your brother-in-law and have babies with him so that the name continues forward. But in the ancient world, it's kind of interesting how they look at it. Look at this. However, if a man does not want to marry his brother's wife, then, most women in that position might say, that's great, thanks, I don't want any part of that. Look what happens. She shall go to the elders at the town gate and say, my husband's brother refuses to carry on his brother's name in Israel. He will not fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to me. In other words, from the woman's perspective here in Deuteronomy 25, she wants the name to carry forward, and that means marrying her former brother-in-law, who's now without his brother. She's without her husband, and she, in this passage, is saying, I want this to happen. Then the elders of this town shall summon him. That's the brother-in-law who's now expected to become the husband and the father. If he persists in saying, I don't want to marry her, what happens? His brother's widow shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, take off one of his sandals, spit in his face, and say, this is what is done to the man who will not build up his brother's family line. Wow. So the elders are going to watch as the widow pummels the brother-in-law for not marrying her and not allowing her to have babies with him so that the family line continues. That's really not how we think about it in Western society, is it? But just tells us how important in the culture was the keeping of the line, keeping the name going, making sure that there were descendants from that tribe, from that line of people. And then in verse 10, that man's line shall be known in Israel as the family of the unsandaled. I haven't heard that before. I know I've read it, but it just never stuck with me. In other words, you just got spit on by your former sister-in-law. You are now being hit with one of your own sandals as she pummels you for refusing to carry on the line of the family. You are now the family of the unsandaled. Very interesting. As the passage moves forward, it says if two men are fighting, so now we come to another hypothetical. Two men are fighting, and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts. That usually stops a fight, I'll have to admit that. But that is a zero-tolerance move in Scripture. Here in verse 12, you shall cut off her hand. Show her no pity. Wow. Okay, so even in self-defense, there is no room for that behavior. Interesting. Do not have two differing weights in your bag. So just like that, we shift gears to another topic. Two differing weights in your bag, one heavy and one light. Do not have two differing measures in your house, one large, one small. What is this dealing with here? It's dealing with the integrity needed in business, in weighing things so that there is fairness and honesty and integrity when transactions are completed. You must have accurate and honest weights and measures so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. And here we go. If you're trying to cheat people and gain your own financial strength through hurting other people, lying to them, what does it say? The Lord your God detests anyone who does these things, anyone who deals dishonestly. God strictly forbids it. Again, verse 17, remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came to Egypt. Now, if you remember, Exodus 17, that's it. This is the story where Moses is on the hill. The Amalekites have attacked Israel, and excuse me, Moses is raising his hands before God. When his hands are up in prayer, when he's asking God for help, the army down in the valley is winning. When his hands go down, the army starts to lose. The Amalekites start to win. Moses has some assistance. People keep his hands up in the air, and what happens? Well, the victory belongs to Israel. But as we look at this passage, God is telling them, look, remember Exodus 17. Remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt. When you were weary and worn out, they met you on your journey and cut off all who were lagging behind. They had no fear of God. In other words, I remember this passage. The Israelites told them, look, we just want to pass through. We're not going to bother you. And instead of assisting them or at least allowing them peaceful passage, what happened? The Amalekites attacked them. They had no fear of God. They did not understand that the God that Israel serves is the real God, and that he will give victory to his people no matter how different the armies might be. I'm sure the Amalekite army was much bigger, stronger, well-equipped than the Israelite army. Nonetheless, they were soundly defeated. They had no fear of God, and God responded to defend his people in that instance, if you recall. Verse 19, when the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies around you in the land he is giving you to possess as an inheritance. In other words, when all this takes place and you're settled in the promised land, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. Okay? We're going to make sure we acknowledge the fact that God defended us and that God struck down our enemies as we passed through on the way to the promised land. As we close today, I just want to remind you of one thing, and that is this. If you go to the ruadisciple.com website, there are studies there that would take you through the whole New Testament, take you several other places. We're almost done with the Pentateuch. It'll be up there in a minute too, but just know that there are plenty of other resources available to you if you want to study more about what the Bible says regarding life, passage by passage, verse by verse. God bless you, church. I pray you serve him well today.
Who is it who for sinners shed his blood, and now for cleansing all can plunge beneath that flood? It's Jesus.